My girlfriend gave me an ultimatum. Either I send my 15-year-old sister to foster care, or she leaves. I chose my sister, but now I might have to live in my car. I thought losing my parents was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. The worst thing was when, 3 weeks after the funeral, just before I was supposed to sign the guardianship papers for my younger sister, my fiancée Jessica, who I completely did not expect this from, looked me straight in the eye and, without flinching, said, "James, I didn't sign up for a family daycare. Either you find a way to place Abby in a decent foster home, or our engagement is off. Choose, now." Her words were like a punch to the solar plexus. Not painful, but just utterly sapping your breath. I only remember that in that moment, for the first time in a month of feeling completely empty, something ignited inside me. It wasn't rage, but a cold, steel-hard realization of how little I actually knew the person I planned to spend my entire life with. Jess was my harbor, my plan for the future, my everything, and here she was, forcing me to choose between her and my own blood, a child who had just lost everyone she loved except me. But the choice was so obvious it was almost laughable. It all happened in one bloody month. A month that split my life into before and after. Before this, I, James, 32, a successful manager at a small IT company, lived a perfectly respectable life in a Sacramento suburb. Jessica, 30, and I met 3 years ago, and for the last 2 years we'd lived together in a townhouse we'd just bought. We planned a wedding for next spring, calculated how many years it would take to pay off the mortgage, and discussed names for future kids. Everything was stable, planned, predictable, exactly how I like it. My younger sister, Abby, she's 15 now, was always on the periphery. She lived with our parents in a different state. She was a good, quiet girl who loved to draw and listen to old rock. There was a 17-year age gap between us, and to be honest, I only saw her on holidays. My parents. They were always just my parents. Healthy, eternal. And then the call came from the sheriff. Accident on Interstate 5. Black ice, a semi-truck, head-on collision. Instantaneous. That evening, I drank an entire bottle of whiskey alone, sitting in the dark. Jessica was there, holding my hand, not saying anything superfluous, just being there. That was the Jess I knew and loved. She took care of all the funeral arrangements, canceled my meetings, and I was eternally grateful. After the funeral, the question of Abby arose. We have no other close relatives. My dad was an only child, and my mom's siblings live in Europe and had only seen Abby a couple of times. I was the only one left. Abby, of course, could go into the system, but that felt like a moral crime, in my opinion. She is my sister, and I am her older brother. Couldn't allow it. The parents' lawyer explained the whole guardianship procedure, and I firmly decided. I am taking Abby in. I talked to Jess. I said Abby would move in with us until she finished high school. It's only 3 years. I explained that we would turn our guest room into her bedroom. Jess just nodded then. She said, "Of course, honey. This is a terrible tragedy, and we need to support her. We are family." She looked sincere. That's why I was completely unprepared for what happened a week later, when we were sitting at the kitchen table discussing which school Abby would attend. I mentioned that I would need to cut back on my work hours temporarily to help her adjust. And that's when Jess changed. Her face turned to stone. She set down her coffee cup, looked at me, and spoke for the first time in that voice I will never forget. Icy and purely businesslike. "Wait a minute, James. You're gonna cut back on work? And turn our house, our first home, into a house with a teenager? Do you even realize what you are subjecting yourself to? She's 15, not a 3-year-old. That's problems, hormones, and zero personal space for us. We planned our life, our wedding, not raising your younger child. This is not what we agreed upon." I tried to argue that this wasn't what I agreed upon, that neither of us agreed to our parents dying, but she wouldn't listen. She stood her ground. The conflict escalated. She said I was selfish, only thinking about my heroic impulses, and not about our future together. That I was sacrificing our peace and our money. Our money. That stung. I earned twice as much as her. And so, this morning, with the guardianship papers already in my hand, She approached me with that ultimatum. And here I am, standing in the living room. The documents and a pen are on the table, and Jessica is in front of me. She's waiting for my answer, but I've already answered. I'm signing, I said, for Abby, and you can pack your bags. Her eyes widened, and something like panic flickered in them, but she quickly composed herself. You will regret this, James. You have no idea what you've lost. I only lost what turned out to be an illusion, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was speaking the truth. That same evening, Jessica packed 3 suitcases and moved in with a friend, and I was left alone in the townhouse, which was now legally co-owned by both of us, with a mortgage that I couldn't handle alone, and with a 15-year-old girl who would arrive in 2 days and had no idea what awaited her. I signed the papers. I chose Abby, and now I had to urgently figure out how to make sure she didn't find out that, thanks to my choice, we would both very soon be homeless. The silence in the house after Jessica slammed the front door was louder than any argument we ever had. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that immediately filled the space where her expensive scented candles and brightly colored cushions used to be. I stood there for a solid 10 minutes, just staring at the door, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain out, leaving behind a cold, nauseating emptiness. Then I looked around the meticulously clean, modern living room that suddenly felt huge and wrong. This wasn't our sanctuary anymore. It was just a very expensive cage, and I was already starting to see the bars. I checked my banking app. The mortgage payment for the month was due in 10 days, and my monthly income, even without the extra expenses Abby would bring, was suddenly looking dangerously tight without Jess's half of the bills. She handled the utilities and the groceries. She was the budget queen. Now, I had to manage the entire financial operation, and I wasn't sure I had the skills for that kind of solo management, especially when the primary variable, my sister, was about to enter the equation. I walked into the kitchen and found the note she left, scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. It wasn't an apology or a final angry goodbye. It was a list, a short, brutal list titled, Things You Must Deal With Immediately. Number 1. The house viewing appointment scheduled for Saturday. Don't cancel it. 2. The joint savings account. I'll be transferring my half out tomorrow morning, so use the rest wisely. 3. Don't call me unless it's about paperwork. That was it. No, I love you. No good luck. Just directives, as if I were a subordinate who had just been fired for gross insubordination. The audacity of her immediately moving to liquidate our shared assets while I was busy burying my parents and planning to take on a teenager, it was breathtaking. I crumpled the receipt, but I knew I wouldn't throw it away. I keep it as a reference. My focus had to shift immediately to Abby. She was arriving on Thursday morning via a regional flight that I'd booked online in a haze of exhaustion. I had to make this transition seem normal, not like I just ripped the rug out from under both of us. I spent the next 2 days in a frantic, almost manic state of preparation. I scrubbed the guest room until the paint shone, bought cheap, cheerful bedding online, and managed to find a small, used desk and chair at a local thrift store, paying cash for everything to avoid alerting the joint bank manager to my rapidly depleting funds. I felt like I was building a stage set for a play that was about to be shut down by the fire marshal. I called Mrs. Henderson, Abby's former school counselor, who was thankfully still in contact with my mother. I needed to know everything about Abby's emotional state. Mrs. Henderson was hesitant, saying Abby was quiet but handling things with surprising resilience, which I knew was code for bottling everything up. She stressed that Abby needed routine and space, not sudden changes or intrusive questions. That made my situation even trickier. How do I introduce a new, unfamiliar living situation, the recent death of her entire immediate family, and the immediate absence of my high-powered, controlling fiancé, all while pretending everything is perfectly fine? I realized I hadn't cried since the funeral. I hadn't allowed myself the luxury. Now, sitting alone in the master bedroom, my bedroom for now, staring at Jessica's empty side of the closet, the grief hit me in a dull, heavy wave. It wasn't just the loss of my parents. It was the realization that the woman who promised forever was willing to discard me and my sister when things got inconveniently tragic. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. It made me question every good memory we ever had. Was she always calculating? Was that perfect life just a ticking clock waiting for an external crisis to expose her true priorities? On Wednesday night, I went through the master bedroom one last time. I packed Jessica's remaining few things she'd left behind. A silk robe, a stack of magazines, into a large storage bin and shoved it into the back of the garage. I needed that space to feel entirely mine again. Entirely ours, mine and Abby's. I looked at the calendar. Only 4 weeks had passed since the accident. For weeks, it felt like a lifetime, a brutal, compressed timeline where I'd lost my parents, my future wife, and was on the verge of losing my financial stability, all while preparing to play the role of sole guardian to a grieving teenager. I was exhausted, scared, and yet strangely determined. I had made my choice. Now I just had to survive the fallout, particularly the viewing on Saturday. I couldn't sell the house. Not yet. Where would we go? I took a deep breath and forced a smile onto my face as I looked at the spare room door. Tomorrow Abby gets here. I need to be strong. I need to be the safe harbor she needs. I just pray she doesn't ask too many questions about why my high-powered, successful fiancé suddenly vanished from the face of the earth 3 days before she arrived. Abby arrived on Thursday morning, exactly on schedule, looking small and fragile next to the baggage carousel at Sacramento International. She was wearing the same oversized black band t-shirt she'd worn in the last photo I saw of her, and her eyes were enormous pools of dark exhaustion. She hugged me tightly, a desperate, bone-crushing hug that told me everything Mrs. Henderson couldn't put into polite counseling terms. I held her for a full minute, feeling the tremor run through her small frame, and whispered assurances about how much I loved her and how we would get through this, using all the sincere words I had prepared. The first 2 days were an exercise in forced normalcy. We ordered pizza, watched old animated movies, and I kept the conversation light: school, music, anything but mom and dad. She was quiet, observant, rarely initiating conversation, but she ate, she slept, and she didn't cry. I saw that as a small, hard-won victory. The real tension started on Saturday morning, the day of the house viewing Jessica had scheduled. I had spent Friday night deleting every trace of her presence, packing away the designer throw pillows, taking down the ridiculous, expensive abstract art she insisted on hanging, and scrubbing the faint outline of her yoga mat from the hardwood floor. I even changed the Wi-Fi password because, frankly, I didn't trust her not to try and use it remotely. I managed to postpone the viewing until Monday, telling the realtor, a man named Mark, that an urgent family matter had come up, hoping I could buy myself 48 more hours of peace before I had to put a for sale sign in the yard. Abby was quietly sketching at the new desk I'd bought her when my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. It wasn't a call, which was typical. She never used the phone for confrontations, only for paperwork and execution. The text was short. Mark called me. He said, "You postponed the viewing." "Why, James? You know we need to liquidate this asset ASAP. That mortgage payment is not your responsibility alone anymore. Call me." The word asset hit me like a slap. She hadn't even paused for a breath after the funeral before categorizing the home we built together as a financial liability that needed to be immediately liquidated. I ignored the text. 5 minutes later, my screen lit up again. A call from an unknown number. I debated answering, the fight-or-flight instinct kicking in, but I knew I had to face the fire. "Hello," I managed, keeping my voice low so Abby, sketching furiously in the next room, wouldn't hear. "It's Jessica, James. Don't play games. I saw your bank statement this morning. You transferred almost $5,000 out of the joint account 2 days ago. Cash withdrawals and store cards. You're bleeding money trying to set up a nursery for your sister. I told you, I am not funding this fantasy." Her voice was sharp, amplified, like she was speaking into a cheap speakerphone. "It's not a fantasy, Jess. It's my sister. And that money was mine, I earned it. I'm handling the transition." I snapped back, immediately regretting the volume of my voice. "Transition? You're taking an irreversible step that directly impacts my financial future. I need that equity." "Look, I spoke to Sarah, my friend who works in social services. She said the system is designed for this. It's better for Abby to be placed with a family who is licensed and prepared, not with an emotionally compromised man who is about to lose his house because he chose martyrdom over responsibility. You have until Monday to call Mark and confirm the showing, or I will contact our attorney first thing Tuesday morning and start the process of dissolving the marriage agreement for breach of fiduciary duty. The mention of an attorney, of breach of fiduciary duty, chilled me to the bone. She was serious. She was moving with ruthless efficiency, leveraging our shared property against my guardianship. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was trapped. If I sold the house, where would we go? If I didn't sell, I'd default on the mortgage within 2 months, and we'd be homeless anyway, only now with a legal battle looming. I looked towards the closed door of Abby's room. She needed stability now more than ever, and I was about to be caught in a catastrophic, messy financial collapse that Jessica herself was engineering. All because I chose my blood over her convenience. The pressure was immense. Every second that passed made the situation more airtight. I felt like I was holding a bundle of dynamite, and the timer was ticking down faster than I could find the switch. The ultimatum, the legal threat, the cold efficiency. It all hammered me over the weekend. I couldn't tell Abby anything. She was starting to emerge from her shell, cautiously accepting the small kindnesses I offered. She asked about my job, about the area, even pointed out an error in a wiring diagram I'd left on my desk, revealing a sharp, technical mind I never knew existed. She seemed to view me as a fortress, a constant in the hurricane that had ripped her world apart. That made Jessica's threat feel 10 times heavier. I spent Sunday night not sleeping, but making frantic, humiliating calls to my bank manager and my own corporate lawyer, explaining vaguely that I was going through an acrimonious split and needed immediate advice on asset liquidation versus personal debt assumption. The consensus was grim. If Jessica pushed, I would lose the house fast, and the legal fees alone would wipe out my savings buffer. Monday morning arrived, and I called Mark, the realtor, my voice tight. "Mark, I need to list it. Full asking price, quick close. Find me a buyer immediately." I could practically hear Jessica signing papers on her end, a silent, victorious smirk plastered on her face as she watched me crumble. I felt the betrayal keenly. She wasn't just leaving. She was actively trying to make my life impossible, ensuring my attempt at being a responsible guardian would result in destitution. Abby walked into the kitchen while I was on a tense call with Mark, pacing the perimeter of the kitchen island. I covered the receiver with my hand, whispering a sharp, "Not now, Abby," which earned me a look of wounded confusion. She retreated immediately. When I hung up, I realized I had less than a week before the house, the only stable roof over our heads, might be gone. I had to make a choice between keeping the house and probably losing my job due to financial distraction, or selling the house and moving us into a cramped, temporary rental while Jessica continued to bleed me dry through legal maneuvering. The situation was rapidly devolving into a disaster movie where the protagonist has already failed the first 2 tests. That afternoon, while researching the most affordable, depressing apartments near my office, I found an email from my parents' estate lawyer, Mr. Peterson, that I had completely overlooked in the immediate chaos. It was dated 3 days before the accident. The subject line read, "Urgent review, trust amendments and insurance policies." I clicked it open, heart sinking. I assumed it was boilerplate stuff about life insurance policies she wanted me to be aware of. The email detailed 2 major amendments to their primary trust, both signed and notarized less than a month ago. The first was standard. They had quietly moved a significant portion of their liquid assets, far more than I realized they possessed, into an irrevocable trust specifically naming Abby as the primary beneficiary, managed by Mr. Peterson. This was a relief. Abby wouldn't be destitute. The Second Amendment, however, made my blood run cold, freezing me halfway to the laptop. It stated that due to recent, deeply concerning discussions regarding the stability and suitability of James's current romantic partner and the potential instability that her influence could introduce into the home environment, the trust terms dictated that if James were to separate from his then-fiancée, Jessica Miller, All management responsibilities and direct monthly disbursements for Abby's care and education would immediately transfer to an appointed secondary guardian, not James. The email concluded with the final kicker. The secondary guardian, should the separation trigger the clause, was named clearly. Mr. Alan Davies, Jessica's father, who was also a partner at the law firm handling the estate. The carefully constructed wall I had built around Abby, the one I thought I was guarding alone, had been built by my parents based on their secret mistrust of Jessica. They anticipated this. They saw the danger before I did. This wasn't just about losing Jessica. This was about losing control over Abby's well-being to Jessica's father the moment I followed through on my choice and officially broke up with her. The irony was brutal. If I stuck with Jessica, I kept Abby. If I chose Abby over Jessica, I lost both the house and direct custody to Jessica's dad. The entire month had been a series of forced choices, and the real choice, the one that actually mattered, was hidden in a legal document I only found after I had already burned the bridge. The reality of the trust clause hit me like a physical blow. My parents knew. They saw the coldness, the calculation in Jessica that I, blinded by love and routine, had completely missed. They hadn't just protected Abby from their death. They had protected her from my terrible, almost fatal judgment in choosing a partner. Alan Davies, Jessica's father, the man who once casually suggested my career trajectory was cute for a regional manager, was now the contingency guardian. If I formalized the breakup, Alan took control, effectively granting Jessica and her family access to Abby and her new wealth, neatly bypassing the messy details of our own divorce. It was a perfectly executed, posthumous defensive maneuver. I felt a paralyzing wave of shame and fury. I had proudly sacrificed my relationship and my home for Abby, only to discover that my heroic choice was a direct trigger for her being legally handed over to the very family I was fighting against. I slumped into my desk chair, the email glowing in the dark, and realized I had only one move left, and it had to be perfect. Couldn't tell Abby. I couldn't break her fragile sense of security with yet another complication. I called Jessica. I bypassed the cold texts and the legal threats. I called her directly. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight with expectation, ready for me to capitulate about the house. James? Did you call Mark? Good. Look, about the attorney. Stop. I cut her off, my voice steady, deliberately devoid of emotion. I know about the trust, Jess. I know about Alan Davies. A beat of absolute silence followed. The silence was different this time. Not the silence of anger, but the shock of a plan derailed. What are you talking about? She finally stammered. The smooth edge gone. The amended trust. The clause that kicks in upon our formal separation. The one that makes your father Abby's guardian and gives him control over the discretionary funds my parents set aside for her. They didn't trust you, Jess. And they were right. You were never in this for the family. You were in it for the asset. Well, guess what? The asset is Abby, and my parents locked you out. Her composure completely shattered. You're lying. They loved me. I was handling everything, she shrieked. A sound so raw and ugly that it confirmed everything my parents suspected. No, you were handling the liquidation. And now you have a problem. I still have not officially filed for separation. I am still, technically, your fiancé. If I file now, Alan gets Abby. If I don't file, we remain in this legal limbo where the house sale is stalled and you can't touch the real money. Abby's money. So here is the new deal. You back off the house, completely. You sign the quitclaim deed, transferring your share to me for a symbolic $1. We will call it a reimbursement for services rendered. And I will walk away from the engagement quietly. No lawyers, no messy public separation. I will wait until Abby turns 18, 3 years, to formalize the split. Until then, we are an estranged but legally engaged couple, and the trust clause stays dormant. If you call Alan or even breathe the word foster care, I will file the papers and send him the proof that you are currently trying to evict a grieving minor. Your father's reputation, and your access to those potential funds, dies with your conscience. Choose. The ensuing negotiation was quick and brutal. Jessica realized I had her cornered. The thought of losing both the house and the possibility of influencing Abby's inheritance through her father was too much. The next morning, a signed quitclaim deed arrived via courier. I was financially devastated, stuck with a massive mortgage, but the house was ours, mine and Abby's, and most importantly, Abby was safe from legal maneuvering. 3 days later, I drove Abby to her new school. She was quiet on the ride but held her head high. As we pulled up, she looked at me, a tiny, genuine smile on her face. "Thank you, James, for everything. It feels safe here." I smiled back, but inside, I felt hollowed out. I was a 32-year-old single parent, financially wrecked, living in a house I could barely afford, officially engaged to a woman I despised, all to protect a trust fund I couldn't touch for a sister who was oblivious to the battlefield I'd created for her. It was a Pyrrhic victory, a choice that cost me everything but the one thing that truly mattered, my integrity and her safety. That month taught me that true family is the only asset worth going bankrupt for. I have 3 years to figure out how to pay this mortgage and raise a teenager, all while legally pretending I still love the woman who wanted to discard her. The silence in the house is still loud, but now, it's not an empty silence. It's the sound of a new, complex future being built, one brick at a time. And as Abby walked into that school, I realized my life wasn't about planning anymore. It was about surviving.